Concussion Talk podcast. I'm Nick Mercer.
And I'm Erin Guilfoyle.
Before we talk to our guest, Barbara O'Connell of ABI Ireland, I'd like to thank our sponsor, HeadCheck Health. Concussion Talk podcast is presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. So thank you, Barbara and Eva, for getting this organized, helping us get this organized, this discussion with the Acquired Brain Injury Ireland. And I'm here with Eva, who's now silent, and Barbara O'Connell, and Eva Lucy. Eva Lucy.
And you don't need to mention me at all. I'll be in the background.
I am now, so no worries. And Erin Guilfoyle. And so Barbara, could you mention the your title and the name of the organization so we can have that, and people know.
Okay. Yeah. I'm Barbara O'Connell, and I'm co-founder and chief executive of Acquired Brain Injury Ireland.
Great. Well, then I guess we'll get Erin later to ask you more about the organization. But first, I'd just like to ask you about just the brain injury in Ireland. What is the prevalence of brain injury in Ireland? Like, where the ages? How would you say the age and activity, which are the most obvious culprits?
Yeah. I mean, Ireland has a population of about 4.9 million people. And what we've found with, I suppose we put traumatic brain injury and acquired brain injury together. So if you're separating it out, there's about 11,000 people a year who have a traumatic brain injury. And there's about 9,000 who'd have a stroke. So I suppose our organization would look after both. So you're talking about, that total of around 19,000 a year would suffer an acquired brain injury. And it would happen across the country. I think our biggest cause is probably road traffic accidents and falls. And then after that, it would be, I suppose the acquired brain injury part would be around, people who would have had a stroke, or people who would have anoxic brain damage, or other causes really, which would be very similar to your own country. Presenting. I think the differences would be in the sports injuries, whereby maybe in Canada you'd have much more to do with hockey, whereas we would have what we would call Gaelic games, the GAA games. So we would have our own football.
Hurling looks like a vicious sport.
Hurling, yes.
Yeah, here it's very popular.
Football and hurling would be the two main kind of national games that we would have. And that would be where you'd get a lot of more sports concussion arising, which would be kind of similar to your kind of hockey. And we would be as enthusiastic about our Gaelic games as you are about your hockey.
Yeah. Would you say that the trends in Ireland for brain injury are similar to, I don't know how well you know of all of Europe's brain injury, but would you say the trends are relatively the same?
Very similar. Similar. Yeah, I think it's just the type of sport might differ. But if we don't have a very good database here in Ireland, so an awful lot of the time we extrapolate our figures from the US and from the UK and Canada, so we find we're very similar.
Okay. Yeah. And when people say age range is about like the same, or
what we find is mostly men, predominantly men.
Okay.
So it's still 3 out of 4 men to women, approximately, and the main age group would be the 18 to 35 age group. And then obviously, if it's stroke you're looking at, it's a little bit older than that. We would, our services in particular, we serve people up to age 65.
Okay, and the youngest is 18?
18 to 65. Now, saying that, because we're the only brain injury services in the country, we have, I suppose what you'd say, piloted projects, with under 18s. simply because we know we can help them, but we're not specifically funded to do so. So we have taken, like, we're really advocating for adolescent services at the moment because there aren't any specific brain injury adolescent services. So that is something, but generally we're funded. We're like, again, like yourselves, we're a publicly funded country health service. So we rely hugely heavily on our, what we would call the health service executive funding.
Okay, which actually is a great segue to my next question. Like, so even just pediatric and teenagers and adult population, the resources for hospitals and for rehabilitation. What's the situation like in Ireland now for rehabilitation and treatment?
I tell you what, we have one National Rehabilitation Hospital which has 110 beds, of which 40 are for brain injury. So we're quite poorly served in terms of our specialist rehabilitation hospital inpatient treatment. They also would have an outpatient department. Some people with brain injury, so there are two large neurosurgical units, but what happens is that they're national centres. So if you live in the north of the country, like you can only go to either Beaumont in Dublin or in Cork University Hospital. So there are the two places. And what tends to happen is people either go back then to their regional hospital, or if they're lucky enough, they'll get into the National Rehab Hospital. But many don't. So we don't have a proper pathway. And I don't think we're unique in that. I think other countries are finding the same thing. So people will stay in acute hospitals longer. Or they're discharged inappropriately back to their regional hospitals where they stay there as an inpatient. Or some people then, could find themselves in a nursing home because there isn't, they're not able to be discharged home to their families. So we do have people who are inappropriately placed in nursing homes. And I think that's our driving factor to kind of stop that. And there are very little in the community services apart from our own. So, and that sounds pretty bleak. And I suppose what I would say on the other side is the services we have are world class, so we do have really, really good services. We just don't have enough of them. There is a geographical inequality. And I'd say like Canada, it depends on the province that you're in, probably dictates what service you're going to get. We have the same difficulty here. In that there isn't an equality yet, and that's one of the things I suppose that we strive to try and overcome.
Yeah. So those just say would be the main challenges of brain injury patients in Ireland is to just get over the accessibility gap to services, or is there a structure?
We also have, our country is divided into 9 health areas, and each health area have their own way of dealing with brain injury, right? So as a national organization, we do have a challenge of trying to deal with 9 different, health systems. I think the other thing we discovered is that there isn't a high awareness of brain injury. So we have come across people who are nearly crying with relief because they kind of thought they were losing their mind, or that, so-and-so has never been the same since his accident, and they've just learned to get along with it. And I think when we've raised the level of education, it's almost like, oh my God, there are so many people who have had a brain injury in the country that we don't know about, who've never had any specialist input. I think there's another educational element where I think our health services don't realize they need to provide specialist care. They seem to think that, well, sure, people are going to get better themselves, or else they don't need a specialist, or a generic occupational therapist or physio will do. You don't need a neuro, you don't need somebody with experience. So we've had to do a lot of education around that. That people do need a very individualized and very specialist response to their brain injury.
Right. No, that's definitely, and actually,
particularly the walk-in wounded, Nick, you would know, I'm sure your own experiences when you look fine and you're functioning fine, but people think, well, sure, what do you wouldn't be prioritized in this country for help, whereas you could be seriously struggling. You could be really disempowered. You could be really very disabled.
I do have a genetic health from just sitting here, but I do have a severe limp and balance problems, so that makes them a bit more obvious. But yes, I mean, I've definitely talked to a bunch of
Yeah.
all the brain injury survivors and concussion survivors and stuff, and who
Yeah.
find that same issue, that they look fine, but inside they're struggling. So
yeah, their memory problems, they
yeah,
fatigue, they're sometimes impulsive, they can't follow directions, they can't problem solve. So they're very vulnerable. And it affects everybody in different ways. So we've had to do a lot of work to try and raise that profile, that just because you look okay doesn't mean you are okay,
which is again brings to the actually, because last year I did a podcast with June in 2019. It seems ages ago now, but I did a podcast with Megan Adams, who is a physiotherapist in Toronto,
right?
and she talks about the biopsychosocial
Yeah.
approach to ranging, and I know that's on your website as a key thing
Yes.
you're trying to do. So could you talk about that for a second before I turn it over to Aaron to ask about your association, so the biopsychosocial?
Yeah, I mean, what we find is that we have a lot of, we call them clients, well, we tend to call them lads, but that say that they've lost their friends, their intersocial, their social skills. Like if you've had a blow to the frontal lobe, for example, that voice that says, don't say that now, doesn't work. So your monitoring system isn't working. So you're being a bit blunt or a bit over the top, people have lost friends. They can't remember conversations they had. So you get that whole subtle piece is missing, and that actually leaves people really very isolated. And one of our guys would have described it almost as being in a foreign country and not being able to speak the language. They just can't find the cues on the signposts to kind of help them interact. And so we would find we would do a lot of work with people around self-monitoring, around that kind of self-awareness, and just, I suppose, relearning how to interact in a more positive way than before. And that is actually probably more disabling maybe than, a physical problem that somebody might have.
Yeah. So that's I'll bring it to Aaron's questions about how people can go with end up in society, fit in, adapt to society.
And there's just one other thing, Nick, I might just start before I come to you. And it's one of the things that we do is we tend to be very individualized.
Yeah.
So every person with a brain injury is different. So our rehab programs are very specific. So when you talk about psychosocial problems, it could be a mother, for example, who's lost the role of being a mother, and all of a sudden everybody's doing everything for her and she's lost her place in the family.
Yeah.
Or it could be, so it depends on the person and the challenges that they have, that the program would be a response to that, as opposed to, we don't believe that a generic, 6 people in a room talking about psychosocial problems is necessarily as helpful as somebody actually having on-site or personalized approaches given to them about how to deal with specific problems.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like your, like in Ireland, has a lot of the same problems and issues that we experience here in terms of that gap of service where you're not getting community rehabilitation. It's like you go from the hospital or home or long-term care home, and that's about it, which has really been the driving force for our own association here, the Newfoundland and Labrador Brain Injury Association. Right. So I'm wondering how yours got started then, the background of when and why you set up. I read a little bit about how you were occupational therapy manager, and that kind of inspired you.
So I have a brother who had a brain injury at 23, and he had finished his legal studies, and he was knocked off a motorbike by a driver coming out of a side road. And that, I suppose, and then he had a further accident later on in his life. He had 2 very serious brain injuries. So I suppose, and my background was an occupational therapist, and I went to work in the National Rehabilitation Hospital for a number of years. And they gave me this job. It was at the time in 1996. This is how new we are. They said to me, Barbara, we think people still have problems when they leave hospital with brain injury. Do you think you could do something? And that's how kind of new it was. So my job at that time was to bridge hospital and home. And what I discovered was there was nothing. There were no supports there. And so when my brother then had a relapse, he had a further stroke, and he was in a nursing home. Now, he was perfectly physically fit and self-caring, but had memory problems. So they put him in the dementia unit, which was locked, obviously, for secure reasons. And he'd be in there at the age of 40. So that's what motivated myself and my husband to set up what's now known as Acquired Brain Injury Ireland. And what we did was we got a house in the community, and we had himself and 2 others with a brain injury who were in hospital, taking up a bed space, not supposed to be there and appropriately placed. And we tried that was the first assisted living place in Ireland at the time. So that's 21 years ago now.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the start of it. And I suppose I just knew there was nothing else. And then what happened was the hospital came to us and said that there was a woman who wanted to take her husband home. Again, he was in his late 40s. And the only other option was a nursing home. But she could take him home if we did something during the day. So that started our in-home rehabilitation programs. And we had such success with them, which when you know brain injury, you know you can have success, because if you give people the right interventions, they can do really well. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of success drove it. Then the HSE, our health service, came back to us and said, "Oh, we'd like you to do, some more over here." So over the years, we now have 16 residential services across the country. We have in-home rehabilitation assistants who go into people's homes. So either on discharge from hospital, or if they come to our attention in terms of they've been discharged, and then they come to us. And all of them are overseen by a clinical team. So we would have neuropsychology, occupational therapy, social work, and we get in physio and speech and language therapy as we need them. So that would be what we would provide. And then we have, so that then went on to, we have a case management. What we decided was people would go into hospital and then we'd never hear of them again. They'd go home and nobody would track them. Nobody would know where they were. And only would you hear if there was an emergency, or sometimes families had to take the health service to court to try and get services. So our case managers are now the one point of contact. So, which is great. We don't have them everywhere, but we have 9 of them across the country.
Do you find that a lot of your cases come from rural areas, and that would be a sticking point to have this case manager there as well, just to keep that in contact?
Yeah. And often it's families, having to get to know this person again. And so something happens at home and they don't know how to deal with it, and they've nobody to ring to ask. So a lot of the case manager's job is support and training for families. So that's another piece of the services. And I suppose that has led us on now to the family support service that we offer. And if there's anything positive has come out of COVID, it's this, because often rural families don't want to come into groups to sit and to train. They don't really want, they don't even want their neighbours to know their business, really. I don't know if you've experienced that, but when you live in a small town or a small place, you're fairly private. So what has happened with the online, with COVID, is people are really happy to come onto a Zoom and they can listen. They don't have to speak, but they feel they're part of another group. They feel...
Yeah, it can certainly give that sense of being anonymous, but still being part of community.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's why the concussion, the McGill group works so well, because all those people can just come on and just listen to other people.
A lot of our support groups have really taken off in that sense.
And I suppose also, if you live with a loved one who has a brain injury, you have to get someone in to sit with them or to take care while you go off to a support network, whereas this way they don't have to. And the other thing we found was that we're offering a lot of our services now online, because the guys themselves are saying, I don't have to travel, I'm not so tired, I'm very focused, because there's the whole idea of distractions and trying to keep concentration, and that they find they can concentrate better. So I know it sounds terrible, but a good thing has come out of rehab services for us, because we're now delivering a lot of rehab online, particularly to that group who don't have huge physical kind of challenges. The other piece then that we've developed is that in this country, we had a lot of day centres for generally people who with a disability. So there would be a lot of people maybe born with a disability, or maybe, you know, wheelchair users or that. And I found that the group that we worked with didn't want to be part of that. And for a couple of reasons. The old concentration span isn't be as, you know, so they become disruptive. You know, they can't remember the class they did last week. So, well, you know, you can't have a continuity of a class. These are people who've lived a life and don't want to be told necessarily what to do either. But what they do love is being meeting other people who've also had a brain injury, you know, being motivated, you know, linking with each other, having kind of peer support. So we developed a different type of day resource centre that they run. So we would have paid staff, but their job is to support the guys to run their own service. And that's been hugely successful. So they have to run the budget, they have to make sure it's clean, they have to make sure that so I don't know if you're familiar with the clubhouse model, but it's based on the clubhouse model for brain injury. So they love
that's such empowerment.
Yeah. And I think that's our ethos is, and I actually, you know, I actually, if I could read our mission statement, because it kind of sums it up. So we passionately serve and relentlessly advocate to empower and support people impacted by brain injury to rebuild their lives. And I suppose I would believe very strongly that I would want someone to empower me if it was me. And the staff are trained for choice. That's one of our values. They're trained to empower people to do as much as they can for themselves. So it is hilarious. You go into the day resource centre and it's not like any other. So you have people with all their foibles and people who can concentrate and people who can't, and they decide themselves. And sometimes decisions have to be assisted, because I have seen hours go by and they haven't decided what they want to go to see in the cinema. Decision making is a challenge, but it's their decision making. So that would be how we would, you know, in our training with staff, it would be to make sure that these people are guiding and leading their own lives the way you or I would want it to be if we were in that position.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have heard about that model, but I've never seen it in practice. So it's so nice to hear about. Yeah. It's certainly a group where you want to be encouraging and have that support, but I find sometimes we want to control everything and have those specialized plans, but it's like, no, anyone can make their own plan, and that's the point. It's like we need to empower them to do that.
They often end up doing the same activities. I mean, they do yoga and they do, you know, they do different classes and they do cooking and everything, but they choose to do it and they choose what it is they're going to cook, and they're part of the whole. And I just think, I think that's, and they also self-regulate, they regulate each other. So if you have somebody who keeps interrupting, for example, and there's always that person maybe with a more severe brain injury, the others will tell them, would you ever shut up? Like, like there's no filter. And that's the other thing they love. Like you go in there and there's absolutely no filter. Like nobody has a filter, but none of them do. So it's a very acceptable, safe place to be. Whereas in other centres, they get into fierce trouble because, you know, there's bad language and they can't, and sometimes people can't even help that. It just comes out spontaneously. But that doesn't always go down well in other centres where people don't understand or don't have those kind of cognitive problems. So yeah, it has worked. They like, and I suppose we would then welcome people to come in and talk. They like people coming in to talk about their experiences and everything. So it's not us talking about, sorry, I don't like the us and them, but those with brain injury, like people have come into our services and go, I don't know who's the staff. We don't know who the brain injury people are. And we go, no, that's the whole point. That can be threatening for people. You know, it's like, well, where's the staff member? Well, you know, like they're not easily identifiable. And that's part of our, I suppose, our ethos, that we're all equals, you know, but just we have skills that need to help you, use yours better, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That seems to cover a lot of your services that you guys currently have. How does your organization operate there? Is it funded by the government? Is it funded as a nonprofit? And are you accredited to do these services within different areas?
Yeah. So how it works is that we're funded about 92% by the HSE, which would be our Health Service Executive. How it's grown over the years, if I'm really honest, is that there's been people who have difficulties in the areas that are seen as probably a problem, and we've gone in and worked with these people, and then they have contracted us. So we provide the services on behalf of the HSE because we have the expertise. And each area contract their services separately, each of the 9 areas. So we would have like 9 service agreements with each of those 9 areas. And we would get some central funding for our central core. So our human resources, you know, our finance, whatever. It is a non-profit. We have charitable status. But so our fund, we do fundraise, and all of the fundraising money goes directly to providing, as you know, health state bodies don't provide for all the extra things you need. So that's what we use it for directly. Like literally all of the fundraising goes directly for either materials or, you know, vehicles or things that the houses need. And that's how we kind of manage those extra bits, really. So we have to lobby, and we have to keep going back to educate our health service executive on what's needed, because we find that we've got big long waiting lists, and people are having accidents every day. So it's not like a different population maybe of people who maybe you can predict, like with spinal cord injuries in this country, we can predict how many kind of you're going to have every year, but obviously with brain injury you can't. So you're working on that kind of need-led kind of service, you know, or demand-led. That's kind of how we try to respond. So we're kind of advocating all of the time for more services.
And in that sense, like, how do you hope to grow as well? Like, what are your future goals, I would say?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, because a lot of money is now gone on, you know, COVID and vaccinations and that, and we also compete here with intellectual disability services. So we would have an aging population of people who may be heretofore looked after by parents at home. We would call intellectual disability would be, I don't know if you call it learning disability, but these would be people who would be born, you know, in terms of developmentally. So they're aging parents and they need residential. So we do compete in this country with that pot of money, and that's a challenge for us. So in terms of development, our plan at the moment is on a number of fronts. So one of the things I haven't mentioned is our policy and research piece, that we reach out internationally. So at the moment we're partnering with IBIA, and they were supposed to come to Dublin. We were hoping all these people were going to come to Dublin, but we're going to have a virtual conference this year now in July 28th. And we have a lot of research projects going on with the local universities. So we're looking at the etiology, the figures around, you know, who are these people with brain injury, where are they? So there's a couple of really good high-level research projects going on. So that's one of the things that we have pushed across, like, really strongly. The other piece we do is education and training. So there are lots of people in nursing homes, and you'd find this the same, who don't know anything about brain injury. So they ring us, you know, they're ringing you up going, can you run a training program? Can you? So we have developed that end as well. And in terms of services, what seems to be happening now is that some of our areas are seeing what other areas have. So if we're well developed in some areas, now what we're seeing is, oh, we would like a service there. So in our next 12 months, we're developing a whole new residential service with a whole new clinical team down in Kerry, for example, which is brand new. And that's like really exciting. So it tends to be around maybe somebody who's had no services, desperately needs services, who's costing the HSE lots and lots of money. And we're coming in going, well, for that amount of money, we can not only look after your person, but we can look after 5 or 6 more people, plus we can put in a community service for you. And they're kind of going, really? And like, that's the kind of education stuff we have to. So we have done some research on cost benefit of rehab. Like, does it make any difference? So we're, as part of our CARF accreditation, are you familiar with CARF? All of our services are CARF accreditation. I think in Canada, a lot of your services, your brain injury services, are also accredited by the same body. So it's the Commission for Accreditation of Rehab Facilities.
Okay.
So we have them all, and part of that is we measure the outcomes. So anybody coming into our service, there's a measurement at time 6 months to see basically, did we make any difference to your life at all? Like, and that's great for us to know that we have made a difference, but also it helps when you're advocating for funding, you know. So we're able to say things like 50% of our residents have gone to live on their own, you know, after a maximum of 2 years. Like, that's very powerful when they're going to give you funding, because they say, oh, well, that makes an awful lot of sense, because they were in a nursing home where we were going to have to pay for them for years. Now they're in the community, and what we had to pay for was maybe up to 2 years or 18 months in a residential facility. So I think the key that we have found is to research what you're doing, measure what you're doing with proper, you know, outcomes, and then be able to present a really good case to your health service. And that's really the approach we've decided to take. So we have a number of services in the pipeline now, starting up probably at the end of this year, Q3 of this year. Yeah. So it's almost like, I suppose I feel really passionate about brain injury. I feel that it's a group of people that are forgotten. We would call them like a silent epidemic. I actually love the individuals. I think they're just a great, fabulous group of people to work with. I suppose we're all really committed to try and raise awareness. It takes a long time, but it's really important and it's really worthwhile. And I think we'll continue to do that. We'll do it at a political level. I mean, you're probably the same. We would approach political leaders around it, try and change policy. Yeah, but it isn't a quick fix. It takes time. It's like the dripping tap, you know.
Certainly so. And was there any national research partnerships you currently have within Ireland as well?
Yeah, now just for that I'll refer to my notes, because that's the ones that we are doing with the universities.
Oh, okay, yeah, because you mentioned internationally and kind of how that communication is, but within your own space.
Yes, yeah. There is one other organization that we work with called Headway. It's a smaller organization whose focus is on vocational rehab, which is one of the services so they would provide like a 2-year course for people who want to get back into employment. What we would do is we would do the assessments. So we use the VALPAR assessments to work with people to see where exactly.
What assessments?
They're called VALPAR assessments, VALPAR. And they're fabulous because they're an objective measure of somebody's challenges. So it could be anything from an electrician who doesn't have the manual dexterity to wire a plug, for example, to how long you can stand, to what your level of concentration is. And then it's matched to the job that you would have done before. So if you were an electrician, or if you were even a truck driver or a teacher or whatever, it would measure you against what you would need to be a teacher. So you need to be able to stand for a certain period of time, you need to be able to concentrate, you need to be able to write reports, you know. So these would be assessments that would be able to say to you, look, here is what the norm would be, and here's where you are. And it helps the person understand where their weaknesses are. But it also helps them to go, okay, so where are my strengths, which is more important? And what job could I do? You know, and often people can do lots of jobs if maybe there's prompting put in place, or there's structure put in place, or they're taught how to know when they're tired. Like, we've had people lose jobs because they told the boss to get lost inappropriately, you know, because they were overtired, you know. So it's that kind of. So the partnerships that we have is with the Global Brain Health Institute, which is in Trinity College. And that's really looking at the economics of brain health. That was the piece I talked to you about. Is it value for money? It's rehabilitation.
I've been in contact with Ocean. I'm not sure his last name now, but at Trinity College with the neuroscience
Right.
in concussion and brain injury.
Yeah.
There. I'm not sure if it's the same center or not, but
We work with the people who are doing the economics. They do a lot of function too around living well with dementia and stroke. What we were particularly interested in was how do we prove that it's value for money? Like, why would you bother, provide an intervention for people with brain injury if it's going to cost you a lot of money? Because rehab does cost a lot of money. So we engaged with them around that. But there are other synergies there too, in that we learn a lot from them, and then we would allow them access to with our clients' permission. They would do a lot of research then with us. The other thing we're doing is with Dublin City University, which is looking at pathways through rehabilitation. So I think that's what I was talking to you about. Sometimes you can go from acute to home, you can go from acute to to post-acute. So it's looking at what are those pathways for people, where are people going, what are the challenges they're facing, because we need that too to advocate, because we don't have, and I have to say, when you do it with the university, it has huge weight, and the academics do such a good job in terms of making sure that their evidence stacks up. So that's been fantastic. And then we would have our own national conference, which actually, is now, because it's online and virtual, it's open to anybody, but it's called Brain Power. So what we did was we set up a network. So we've Northern Ireland as well, which is actually belonging to the UK, but we've really good links with them. And I would have gone up and done some stuff with them, advice and stuff, and liaised with them. So and there's lots of smaller people, groups doing little bits of research, and research on carers and research on families. So we decided that we would pool it, P-O-O-L. Pull it, I'm doing my accent. We would pool our resources together. And so we've decided, we set up a research network. So ABI Ireland has set up a research network, and then we have our conference every year. And that's been fantastic because it brings in people from the acute hospital. So we would have a neurosurgeon who's done research on A&E, who's presenting. So he's able to say that our cyclists are the most highest group that present at A&E with concussion. Things that we wouldn't have known or wouldn't have been shared before. And we would have the National Rehabilitation Hospital involved, and any other group, north and south, together. And we share once a year, and that's been truly powerful because, as you know yourself, at conferences, people talk to each other over coffee. People link up. So there's lots of other networking then going on outside that. And I don't know, but the brain injury world is quite small. Like, it is quite small in a sense. You do kind of get to know people. I personally have done a lot of presentations at both IBIA, but also at the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine, the ACRM, which is held in Toronto. So I've been there. And that has allowed me and our organization profile ourselves, but also learn from, the best that's out there in terms of research. So, and because we're part of CARF network, we're at, as I said, we implement the standards that other brain injury services do, but it also gives me a network to make sure that we're benchmarking properly what we do. So yeah, I'd be very proud of that. I'm very proud of the staff and the work they do there, So.
Yeah, no, there's lots of differences, but there's more similarities, I find, in the sense of passion to help and also just wanting to connect, and we can learn so much from each other. And that's amazing that there's so many national research partnerships within there. It's great. Yeah.
I found it amazing. I'm a surveyor for CARF, so I would go, and I've done it in the States, and people are the same. Like, the challenges are the same, people are the same, different accent. Different background, but very, very similar. And,
at our core, we're all just human beings, and a lot of our struggles do line up, whether you're in one spot or the other.
Yeah.
Speaking of the people, at least in Ireland, though, where would they be able to access your services?
Where would they be able to access?
Yeah, would they go online, a call, or is there usually a spot pretty much in every location they would be able to go to?
Yes. So our biggest source is obviously the website,
Mhm.
which obviously is www.abiireland.ie. And people can ring directly to the national office as well. But the other main access point for a referral would be through their GP, their general practitioner or social worker, because we would gather a lot of medical information about people. So we would need to get their consent. They'd need to fill in the referral form. And that referral form would be looking at some of their history in terms of their medical history. So it tends to go through the medical link is the best link, which is your general practitioner. But the form is there to download online. And obviously then we have to get consent from people to be able to look at their information. What happens then is the neuropsychologists, we have a number of clinical neuropsychology psychologists in the organization, and they would then review the request and see if it's appropriate or not, or what would be the generally it's always appropriate, but it's what, sometimes people tick every service, can I do everything? And often they don't need everything. Often sometimes they may only need a one-to-one with a psychologist, you know what I mean? But because they don't know what they need, there is that kind of filtering process that goes on. And then if we have to get funding for someone, so say it's for residential, we will then have to go back to our health service executive and lobby for funding for that person to get a service. So we work hand in glove with the HSE really around people. And if they're not aware of them, we'll make them aware of them. And we'll also be encouraging people to go to their local HSE disability manager and ask for services,
Makes perfect sense. Nick, did you have any additional questions?
I had no additional questions. I was going to ask you about about Europe, about the connections with Europe, because you're talking about conferences and stuff, but I think you guys cover that well in your
Yeah, I suppose if anybody wants to join in our research, if any of your listeners are interested in just popping in to see what's happening in Ireland, do join up, and you can register on the website to join in, because the more of us together that are sharing what we know, I think the better, really.
I think so. So I would just say, could you just note your website again, and I don't know if you have a phone number that's accessible to all, or if you have different phone numbers from different regions, but your website and any that are important, like say social media accounts that you'd like to note that people should know about.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So the other, I suppose the other thing is, I'm just thinking, if for every, we have the 9 different CHO areas, but we've also got like 26 counties. So there is a contact person for a different region. So people are not necessarily ringing a central national office. There are local offices in the region that they can pop into. I meant to say that they can pop in and say, well, not so much with COVID, but generally, normally. We are on Facebook, and we are on Instagram and Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn, people as well. So we can be contacted on all of our platforms.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And we love to hear from people,
Yes.
The bigger the family, the better.
I think that's
I'm really honored today to be talking to you. It's lovely, and it's lovely to connect across the countries,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
we're
great.
so much in common.
We're just across the ocean, so we're immediately across the ocean from you. So just the Atlantic separates us. There's no land between us and you, except for the west of Ireland.
But thank you so much, Barbara. This has been amazing. It's been so incredible just to hear the services and everything there, and just be reminded, I guess, of our similarities and those struggles and the fight to go forward with it.
Yeah.
So,
there are days when you get very down and you just think, what's the point, And what happens to me in those situations is I go to the day center and I meet people, and then you kind of go, yeah, that's why we're doing it, so that people can get their lives back. That's the bit. I think that's the only motivating factor sort of for me. But it is a struggle, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm hoping next week, speaking of Europe, not next week necessarily, but sometime soon, talk to a woman from Amsterdam who has started the concussion community in Amsterdam or just online, really. So, again, reaching across the Atlantic
Yeah.
on, I don't know when, but sometime soon this month, I'm sure.
I think the work you're doing is great, Nick. I really do. And Aaron, I think what you're doing is brilliant because the more we open it up and the more we talk about it, the more I think we share and the more we grow and we don't feel alone so much then.
Exactly.
So I think what you're doing is brilliant.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Barbara O'Connell and Eva Lucy of ABI Ireland. Music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound, www.bensound.com.